Hope you're well, staying safe. Welcome to another session of computer architecture. And we're looking at the penultimate part of chapter number 28, which is securing your computer systems. And ultimately, today, what we're looking at is network security. So, when you're looking at the whole concept of network security, we're basing on internet borne attacks. So ultimately, we're looking at the broader perspective as far as your networking mechanisms are concerned. So ultimately, looking at your firewalls as well as wireless networking. Now, when you look at the whole concept of malware, the term malware is short for malicious software. So this is any executable code or any program that has been distinctively designed for the sole purposes of damaging hardware components like your hard drive, damaging stored content, obviously your data, and illegally looking at the illegal acquisition of that stored content as far as your mechanisms they are concerned. So it's ultimately important to understand the main types of malware architectures that are there, the different behaviors associated with them, and obviously the different type of attack methods when you're looking at it from a networked environment. And I think one of the most common types of malicious software or malware is what you know as the virus. I think most of us are familiar with the whole term of a virus, especially when you're looking at it from an ICT perspective. And then you also have what they call a worm. Now, the distinctive difference between these two types of malwares is that a virus normally needs a human intervention in order for it to propagate across a set of computer systems or on the network. And this human intervention is in the form of exchanging hard drives, exchanging thumb drives as an argument. And these storage platforms or these storage media, if they are infected or if you've got a virus that is incorporated there, the moment you plug it into a specific computer system, then ultimately when you access a specific portion of it or when you start copying any given content, ultimately or transferring content, ultimately that particular computer system becomes infected. And your virus normally has two distinctive functions. So the first one is to replicate, which is to make copies of itself across either that particular drive or across a set of computer systems. And then the second one is to then activate. So after making several copies of itself, then the activation is in terms of it now starting to damage components, starting to illegally acquire or access any stored content as far as those particular storage platforms are concerned. But on the other hand, the second one now, your worm, which is actually gotten from an acronym that stands for write once, read many, does not need any human intervention. Ultimately, it takes advantage or exploits vulnerabilities of any networked computer system that is typically not secured appropriately, especially when you're looking at it from a software-based perspective. And ultimately, what the worm would then do is infect a specific system. Once it infects that system, it now searches for any other connected devices and then ultimately also take advantage of the vulnerabilities associated with those distinctive devices there. So the main difference between arguably the two damage your machines in exactly the same way. The only difference is that one needs human intervention, which is your virus, and the other one does not need any human intervention in terms of it propagating across networked mechanisms, which is your worm. The third one that you want to look at is what they call the Trojan horse. Now, this particular software or malware normally mimics legitimate software while in the background is actually doing something that it's not supposed to. So for instance, I think typical examples would include maybe you downloading and installing a game off the net while you're maybe working or playing on that game or playing that distinctive game. In the background, that a specific software package is actually doing something else. within your systems there. And that's something else is, again, the illegal acquisition of data, sometimes even damaging that stored content, or instead of damage, deleting, and in some instances also even affecting hardware components, especially your distinctive hard drive. I think if you've delved into Greek mythology, there is I'm not so sure if you guys did watch the movie Troy, but in that particular picture there is a specific part where an opposing side presents a statue in the form of a peace offering. That statue is what they call a Trojan horse. And unfortunately, within that statue, you had opposing soldiers hiding there. They presented this particular peace offering during a celebration. And obviously, after these soldiers, in terms of the other side, were intoxicated or drunk, there was an ambush that took place. So I think that's where the whole concept came from there. Look, we're all in some kind of quarantine and lockdown. Why don't you guys do yourselves a solid and probably watch that movie, and then pop me a mail to let me know your understanding of how that whole part is likened directly to the way in which this particular malicious software functions. And then the last one, especially when you're looking at it from understanding what's happening as far as malware there is concerned, is what they call a root kit. Now, what happens here now is this particular software package now takes advantage of vulnerabilities within the operating system as an argument. So it uses the operating system's low-level functions to hide itself and then gain privileged access to the system. So probably access the system as an administrator and then start detrimentally affecting that network environment by, again, like we were mentioning a couple of moments ago, stealing the data or naturally damaging stored content within that distinctive environment there. So those are not the only ones that you'd find, but obviously the four main ones in terms of understanding what this malware is all about. I think in the concurrent session, we'll then look at the other types, especially when you look at malware prevention tips as far as this particular chapter and module content is concerned. Now, when you look at the behaviors, now remember, it's important to understand what type of behavior these malwares are associated with so that you take the necessary and the appropriate steps to try and circumvent any distinctive damage there. And these behaviors would then, or behavioral type of malwares would include spyware. Now, with spyware, most schools of thought would want to argue that there's arguably no particular damage when you're looking at stored content, but just that illegal acquisition of content and also spying on what can detrimentally affect us. So especially when you're looking at online banking, anything to do with certain usernames and passwords that are distinctively problematic if these were illegally accessed by certain individuals or institutions. And more often than not, you once this particular package is installed, all it's doing is just checking for that sensitive information about you or as an individual or institution dependent. But the other type now, that could be quite detrimental. I think it's been happening for a couple of years now. The other type is the ransomware, and the distinctive difference now with this one is that it encrypts stored content. So sometimes a portion of your hard drive, sometimes the entirety of it. So ultimately, all you can do is probably just log in. But as far as accessing stored content is concerned, you are typically barred access. And after encrypting, remember when you encrypt, you're scrambling data into a non-readable format, and you generate distinctive keys that are then used to unscramble or decrypt that data. So with ransomware, your particular data is encrypted, and once it's encrypted, obviously these keys are generated, and the individuals that are responsible will then ultimately ask you to pay some kind of amount, and normally this amount is in the form, or this payment they ask for is in the form of bitcoins, and they give you a timeline to say, okay, look, in the next maybe 24 hours or in the next couple of days, the list will go on and on. But normally it's much shorter in terms of the time frame that you're given. If you don't obviously pay within that time frame, the keys that are relevant in terms of unscrambling your data are automatically deleted from your drive. And now, ultimately, what you're stuck with now is a storage platform that has multitude of data, but that data becomes useless because it's scrambled and you don't have the appropriate key. The other one that you also want to discuss is botnets. So this is when you get a multitude of computer systems that are then used as one in a powerful format to typically illegally gain access to a distinctive environment. And once access is gotten, data is stolen, deleted, or ultimately damaged. And more often than not, you find that half the time, these clusters of computer systems are used to gain access to banking institutions, or sometimes even attack government institutions dependent. But normally the types of attacks would tell you what type of individuals you're dealing with. Normally, if you end up attacking a government space, normally those are novices in the whole computing space there. And ultimately, what is happening with this particular environment now is that a single machine or a single computing platform within that whole group is known as a zombie. So you've got multiple zombies that then are then combined to act as one, which is a botnet. And normally, remember, the moment you combine multiple computing systems, either servers or workstations, they become a bit more powerful in terms of functionality, and that's what they use to obviously illegally gain access within distinctive environments. And normally, excuse me, when you're working with the whole concept of botnets, one of the other ways that they use to try and gain access to certain systems is to send unsolicited mail, which is normally known as spam. And obviously, when you're looking at this with spam, you get individuals, unfortunately, inadvertently opening these mail platforms, or maybe clicking on a link that is in that mail, and ultimately, once that link is clicked on, you've got a malicious code that is now affecting your system or networked environments there. So that's the third one. As far as your behaviors would go, I think that's the main one that, sorry, not main rather, but that's the three main ones that you need to concentrate on, especially when you're looking at module content and obviously from an exam point of view. And then the other type, or the other section that you want to concentrate on now, is the different attack methods that are used when you're looking at the whole concept of network security. And with these ones, you've got 7 distinctive attack methods that you need to familiarize yourself with. The first one, as far as your environments would go, is what they call a zero-day attack. So normally, when you look at developers, or when you look at a rollout of a certain software package, either an OS or application package, it all depends. There are certain vulnerabilities that the developers might not have identified by the time that particular software package was rolled out. And these vulnerabilities are what most unscrupulous individuals now use to start their attack. And the reason why it's called a zero-day attack is because the developers are given typically 0 days to try and ward off that attack, because these are the vulnerabilities, like I was mentioning a couple of moments ago, that they might not have identified, obviously, when that particular package was rolled out. Right, so you've got a 0-day attack, and then the second one that you also want to discuss is what they call spoofing. Now, when you spoof, you're trying to pretend, or you're actually pretending to be someone that you're not. So it's either an individual or a specific device within that network environment that is looking at obviously illegally gaining access to your environments there. And normally, remember, when you look at the whole concept of networking, the whole sending and receiving of messages is broken down into what they call packets. And these packets normally have information that is used to identify where that packet is coming from, where it is going, and obviously what it contains. And ultimately, how spoofing functions now is that they incorporate false information within these packets, so that ultimately you don't know specifically, or you're not typically clued in terms of where that packet is coming from and obviously where it's going. So the kind of platforms that are spoofed are MAC and IP addresses or Internet Protocol addresses. You've got your distinctive web addresses. You've got your email addresses, and in some instances, you can also even discuss usernames. So that's how typically spoofing functions. The third one you want to concentrate on or research on is man-in-the-middle attacks. So this one, it's communications that are intercepted. And normally this interception takes place in wireless networking environments, because half the time with wireless networking, you literally don't have to be physically within a specific environment. As long as you can gain access to or as long as you can get a signal, ultimately you can illegally access a wireless environment there. And what normally happens with a man-in-the-middle attack, it's just recording communication, or arguably just typically sitting there monitoring the type of communication that is taking place. And if you want to delve in further, you normally have two distinctive types of man-in-the-middle attacks. You've got a passive one where someone just accesses content without doing anything, and then, or without participating in that communication. And then you've got active man-in-the-middle attacks where a specific individual or group of individuals now take part of that, or more or less participate in that type of communication. So now normally what now happens is that they end up responding as if they are part and parcel of legitimate communication within that distinctive space. I think this will now also enable you to understand or delve into now the fourth one, which is a session hijacking. Although the difference now is that while session hijacking is actively participating in that communication, the distinctive difference now is with session hijacking, you're just checking for authentication information. So your usernames and your passwords, or certain keys or pins that are used to then obviously enable access to your distinctive environments there. So that's the fourth one. The fifth one is what they call the brute force attack. Now this one is that very aggressive method of guessing passwords, guessing usernames within distinctive environments. And remember, it's not just limited to usernames and passwords. You can even talk about open ports, which are normally used as backdoors to gain access to your networked environments. You can discuss network IDs. You can also even throw into that whole pool your distinctive usernames there. So I think it revisits what we've mentioned before, that when you're dealing with, or when you're configuring your passwords, make sure they're long and quite complex, so that there's a multitude of combinations that need to be incorporated in order for that particular individual to then correctly guess your distinctive passwords there. Remember, these they're mechanisms, that are used in terms of trying to guess appropriately. And these are sometimes really complex algorithms that are designed, but ultimately the whole concept of a brute force attack is just that very aggressive method or way, that is used to try and obviously gain access to that very sensitive information there. So that's your brute force attack mechanisms. That's the fifth one there. The sixth one that you want to concentrate on is the pop-ups. I think all of us have been quite irritated as far as functionality on the internet space there is concerned by pop-ups. And I think it's advocated for you not to click anywhere inside the actual pop-up itself, because ultimately you end up activating unwarranted malicious code there. You also have what they call drive-by downloads. I think within the same concept of your pop-ups, where you access a specific site, and then while you're on that site, you might find that there's certain programs that automatically download onto your system and then start detrimentally accessing content, damaging components, or deleting data dependent. And then the seventh one that you also want to take heed of is spam on or unsolicited mail. And remember, I've said this before, all these tricks in the books normally tend to work. We all know that, look, I haven't subscribed to a certain magazine or to a certain club or for a certain product as an argument, but you get this in your mailbox. And I think with obviously with your later day emailing platforms, they've managed to design a package or design certain elements that are there or are available in terms of identifying what might be spam. But in some instances, you discover that most individuals tend to probably open these particular mail platforms and then probably clicking a link inside that particular mail, and then obviously after clicking that link, your virus or your malicious code starts manifesting itself onto the system there. So I think to some extent user education is also quite important in terms of being able to identify what might be detrimental as far as your systems would go. So that is the seventh one. Those are the ones that you need to concentrate on appropriately, especially when you're looking at it from content as well as assessment perspective, especially your exam. What we will do in the concurrent or the subsequent session that we'll have, that will then conclude chapter number 28, is then look at malware symptoms and look at some prevention tips that you can take into consideration, as well as discussing firewalls within that particular environment there. So as far as today's session is concerned, please research on this particular session, especially or section in your textbooks. As far as network security is concerned, please pop me a mail should you still have any distinctive issues, and then I will engage you accordingly. But again, as usual, guys, please stay safe, stay positive, keep smiling. I will see you in the next session there. Cheers.